The person you keep thinking about still carries a real sense of care for you, even if it does not look clear from the outside. The space you feel between you is not as simple as it seems. It is not empty, and it is not random either. Take a slow breath before going deeper into this, because what you are about to understand carries emotional weight. This is not surface-level connection or casual thinking. It is something that sits quietly in the background of two lives that still feel connected in an unspoken way. When someone keeps showing up in your mind again and again, not once in a while but constantly, it usually points to a bond that has not fully settled or closed. And when silence or distance grows between you and that person, it can feel confusing, even painful, because the heart reads it one way while reality may be more layered than that. The truth is, this person has not simply forgotten you or moved on without feeling anything. Their care still exists, but it does not come in loud expressions or constant messages. Instead, it exists in a quiet form, something subtle, something hidden in their daily thoughts and private moments. They remember small details about you without even trying: your tone, your reactions, the way certain moments felt calm or meaningful. These things stay in them longer than you realize. Stay with this, because the deeper reason behind their distance is not what most people assume at first glance. The space between you is not always a sign of lost interest. In many cases, it is the result of too much feeling at once. When someone feels deeply, especially in a way that surprises them, it can create internal pressure instead of immediate closeness. Instead of moving forward easily, they pause, they think, they question themselves. Real emotion does not always make people brave right away. Sometimes it makes them careful, even hesitant. Because when you matter to someone on a deeper level, you also trigger their fears, their doubts, and their unhealed emotional places. It is not just about liking someone, it becomes about whether they are enough, whether they can handle it, whether they might make a mistake and lose something important. And that kind of thinking can quietly push them into silence, not because they do not care, but because they care and feel unsure about how to hold it properly. So instead of coming closer, they sometimes step back, not to erase you, not to replace you, but to process what they feel. And while you may experience that as distance, inside their mind it can feel like a storm of thoughts. They replay conversations, they revisit memories, they imagine different outcomes that never happened. Everything feels louder inside them than what you see on the outside. Keep watching this closely in your mind, because the pattern behind silence is not always what it appears to be. At the deepest level, this kind of distance often comes from self-protection. When feelings become intense, a person may start believing they could fail you in some way, or that they are not fully prepared to meet the emotional depth you carry. So they withdraw, not because the connection is weak, but because it feels too significant to handle without fear. In their own perception, you may appear as someone who feels deeply, gives openly, and creates emotional intensity that they are not fully confident they can match. That comparison creates hesitation, and hesitation turns into space. But even in that space, the emotional thread is not broken. It continues in quieter forms, in thoughts that appear at random times, in memories that surface without warning, in moments of reflection they never share with anyone. From the outside, it looks like absence. From the inside, it is a struggle between wanting closeness and fearing emotional weight. And this is where many misunderstandings begin, because silence does not always mean lack of care, and distance does not always mean rejection. Sometimes it means someone is trying to manage emotions they do not fully understand yet. The connection still exists, but it is held carefully, not expressed loudly. And if you can see beyond what is missing on the surface, you may begin to understand what is still quietly present underneath it all. Every small detail you think they forgot is actually something they store more carefully than you imagine. A smile, a touch, a short moment of eye contact, even the way you spoke in a normal conversation gets replayed in their mind again and again. From outside, it may look like they are calm or unaffected, but inside there is a very different story running quietly. They compare themselves with you in ways they never express out loud, measuring their own qualities against what they believe you represent. And in that silent comparison, they often feel like they fall short. This does not create indifference, it creates tension inside them, because their feelings are not light at all, they are deep, but also heavy enough to freeze their actions. Stay with this, because what you think is rejection may actually be hesitation wrapped in fear. They feel two opposite forces at the same time, one pulling them toward you and another pushing them away. The wish to come closer grows stronger, but at the same time the fear of not being enough grows with it, so they remain stuck in between, wanting connection but stepping back from it in the same breath. Every time they choose silence, there is a hidden inner struggle happening that you never get to see. Their heart is not absent, it is overloaded. They think before they act, they pause before they speak, and even when they want to reach out, they stop themselves because their mind starts building questions they cannot answer easily. What if they fail you? What if they hurt you? What if they are not enough for the depth you carry? These thoughts create a pressure that becomes hard to carry. So distance becomes their temporary shelter. Not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much and do not know how to hold it safely. Comment, stay, if you understand how silence can hide emotions instead of removing them. Their emotions do not disappear in that space. They simply change form. What you see as absence is often just a quiet struggle happening behind the scenes. They still think about you in unplanned moments during silent nights, or when something small triggers a memory they did not expect. They replay conversations in their head, sometimes wishing they had spoken differently or acted with more courage. But fear interrupts those thoughts before they turn into action. This is where the real conflict lives, not between love and lack of love, but between love and fear of not handling it correctly. You affect them in a way that makes them question their own stability, their own emotional readiness, and even their worth in your life. Instead of stepping forward and risking mistakes, they step back to protect both you and themselves. It is not a simple decision. It is a mental loop they cannot easily break. From your side, it may feel like being pushed away without reason, but from their side, it feels like protecting something fragile. They do not trust themselves fully in the role they believe you deserve someone to hold. So they choose distance as a form of control over emotions they cannot fully manage. And even in that distance, the connection does not end. It keeps existing in thoughts, memories, and unspoken feelings that never turn into words. They miss you in ways they rarely admit even to themselves, but fear keeps those feelings locked inside. The deeper truth is that this space is not empty at all. It is full of unspoken emotion, hesitation, and unfinished inner processing. They are constantly balancing between wanting closeness and fearing emotional collapse. And that balance is unstable, so they stay in motion without actually moving forward. You might wonder why they do not simply choose one direction, but emotional fear does not work like logic. It creates delays, pauses, and confusion even when the heart is clear. They often imagine different versions of what could happen if they came closer, and at the same time they imagine what could go wrong if they tried. That cycle keeps repeating inside them like a loop they cannot escape easily. Meanwhile, you continue to think about them because the connection never received closure. Unfinished emotional experiences do not fade quickly. They echo in thoughts, memories, and silent questions. Your mind keeps returning because something within you is still trying to understand what was left incomplete. This is not weakness. It is how emotional memory works when a bond feels real but unresolved. So both sides remain connected in different ways, one through silence and hesitation, the other through reflection and replay. And even though it looks like distance, there is still emotional weight on both ends. Nothing about this connection is fully gone. It is simply paused under fear, timing, and inner confusion. Until that changes, the silence will continue to feel like distance, even though emotionally it is something far more complex than absence. The connection you experienced was real, and at some point you met a person who genuinely cared, but they were not fully ready to meet your emotional depth in the way you expected. This does not lower your worth in any way, and it is not a reflection of failure from your side. It simply shows how timing, personal healing, and emotional readiness often shape relationships more than intention alone. You shared something honest, something that had feeling, even if it came with silence, confusion, or distance in between. And those moments still left traces on both sides, even if they were never spoken about openly. Distance does not erase what was felt. It only shows where someone was in their own inner journey. Comment, shocked if you never realized how much love can exist alongside distance at the same time. Stay with this, because the meaning goes deeper than it first appears. Love does not always end when it becomes quiet. Sometimes it continues in a slower form, almost hidden, waiting for both people to grow into a place where understanding becomes easier. What you shared does not disappear just because contact reduces or communication becomes inconsistent. It stays inside memory, inside emotional awareness, and sometimes even shapes how a person reacts in their daily life without them realizing it. You may not see it, but the experience remains active in subtle ways. And this is where growth begins for both sides. You learn patience, emotional awareness, and the ability to hold space for someone else's fears without losing your own stability. At the same time, you also learn that love is not only about closeness, but also about understanding hidden struggles that may never be fully expressed. Even silence can carry meaning. Even withdrawal can carry emotion. The connection you experienced becomes part of your emotional development, shaping how you understand care, distance, and timing in future relationships. You deserve a kind of affection that meets you fully, not halfway or only in certain moments. And while this experience may feel incomplete, it still carries value because it teaches you how deeply you can feel and how strongly you can care. The space between you and that person is not only a gap, it is also a reflection of inner growth still taking place on both sides. Sometimes people step back not because they lack emotion, but because they are still learning how to manage it. And in that process, they may unintentionally create distance that feels confusing from the outside. But even then, the emotional thread does not always break. It transforms, it pauses, it waits for clarity that may or may not come later. If they ever return, it will likely be after they have faced their fears and understood their own emotions more clearly. Until then, the space itself becomes part of the journey, not the end of it. It is important not to blame yourself for someone else's unreadiness or to reduce your own needs just to make space for their confusion. If someone truly aligns with your emotional depth, they will not require long distance to figure out their feelings. They will move with you, not away from you. And if they cannot do that right now, it does not reduce your value or your capacity to love. It simply redirects your path toward connections that are more stable, more present, and more emotionally available. Love should not constantly feel uncertain or distant to survive. Real connection grows in clarity, not confusion. The quiet moments you experienced were not wasted because they helped you understand what you need and what you will no longer accept. These insights shape your emotional strength and guide you toward better relationships ahead, whether with this person or someone new. In the end, love never truly loses meaning. It only changes form, teaching you patience, awareness, and emotional depth along the way, until you find the kind of connection that stays consistent without fear holding it back. The connection you experienced was real, and you did come across someone who genuinely cared at a certain level, even if they were not fully prepared to meet your emotional depth in the way you needed. This does not reduce your value in any form, and it is not a sign that you did something wrong or lacked anything. It simply reflects how timing, emotional readiness, and inner healing play a much bigger role in relationships than people usually realize. You shared something honest, something meaningful, even if it came with silence, confusion, and moments of distance in between. Those experiences were not empty. They left emotional traces on both sides, shaping thoughts, reactions, and even future expectations. Distance does not erase what was once felt. It only shows where each person stood in their own inner journey at that time. And if you are still thinking about it, still trying to understand it, that itself shows the depth of what existed. Stay with this, because what you are about to understand may change how you see emotional connections completely. Comment, shock, if you never realized love and distance can exist at the same time without canceling each other out. Love does not always end when communication slows down or when silence replaces constant presence. In many cases, it continues in a quieter form, almost invisible but still active in memory, emotion, and inner reflection. What you shared does not simply disappear because circumstances changed. It remains stored in emotional awareness, sometimes surfacing unexpectedly in thoughts, dreams, or random moments of reflection. This experience becomes part of both people, even if it is never spoken about again. And through this, something deeper begins to form within you as well. You develop patience, emotional awareness, and the ability to understand that not every connection moves at the same speed or follows the same pattern. You also begin to see that love is not only about closeness, but also about understanding fear, hesitation, and unspoken struggles. Even silence can carry meaning. Even withdrawal can carry emotional weight. This is where emotional maturity begins to grow because you start recognizing that feelings are not always expressed in direct ways, but they still exist beneath the surface. At the same time, you also learn that you deserve a connection that meets you with consistency, clarity, and emotional presence. Even though this experience may feel incomplete or confusing, it still holds value because it reveals how deeply you are capable of feeling and how strongly you can invest emotionally. The distance you experienced is not just a gap between two people, it is also a reflection of inner processes that were still unfinished on both sides. Sometimes people step back not because they lack care, but because they are still trying to understand their own emotions and fears. In that process, they may unintentionally create silence that feels like rejection, even when it is actually confusion or hesitation. And even then, the emotional thread is not always fully broken. It simply pauses until clarity or growth happens. If they ever return, it will likely be after they have faced their inner fears and understood themselves better. Until then, this space is part of a larger emotional journey, not the final ending. And through it all, one truth remains steady. Love that is real never loses meaning. It only changes form and teaches you how to grow through it while preparing you for something more stable, more balanced, and more emotionally aligned in the future. The connection you went through was real, and at some point, you met a person who genuinely cared in their own way, even though they were not yet fully ready to match your emotional depth or the level of connection you were offering. This does not reduce your value in any form, and it is not a reflection of anything lacking in you. Instead, it simply shows how timing, personal readiness, emotional healing, and inner stability often guide relationships far more than pure intention or desire. You shared something honest and meaningful, even if it came with silence, distance, confusion, and moments where things felt unclear or unfinished. Still, those moments were not empty. They left emotional impressions on both sides, shaping thoughts, memories, and inner reactions that continue quietly in the background even today. Distance does not erase what was once felt. It only reveals where each person stood emotionally during that period of their life. And if this still stays in your mind, still makes you reflect or wonder, that itself shows the depth of what was actually experienced. Stay with this thought for a moment, because many people never realize how strong emotional bonds can exist even when communication breaks down. Comment shock if you never realized love and distance can exist together without canceling each other out. Love does not always end when silence begins or when communication becomes inconsistent. In many cases, it continues in a slower, quieter form, almost invisible on the surface, but still active within memory, emotion, and inner reflection. What you shared with that person does not simply disappear because circumstances changed or contact reduced. It stays stored within emotional awareness, sometimes resurfacing unexpectedly through thoughts, memories, or moments of sudden reflection. This experience becomes a part of both individuals, even if it is never openly spoken about again. And through this, something deeper begins to grow within you as well. You slowly develop patience, emotional understanding, and the ability to accept that not every connection moves at the same speed or follows a straight path. You begin to realize that love is not only about physical closeness or constant communication, but also about understanding fear, hesitation, emotional wounds, and unspoken inner struggles. Even silence can carry meaning. Even distance can hold emotion. This is where emotional maturity begins forming, because you start recognizing that feelings are not always shown directly, but they still exist underneath the surface of behavior and absence. At the same time, this experience also teaches you something important about yourself. You deserve a connection that meets you fully, consistently, and without confusion becoming the main language between two hearts. Even if this situation feels unfinished or emotionally heavy, it still holds value because it shows you how deeply you are capable of feeling and how strongly you can connect when something matters to you. The distance you experienced is not just a gap between two people. It is also a reflection of inner processes happening on both sides that were not fully ready at that moment. Sometimes people step back not because they do not care, but because they are still trying to understand their own emotions, fears, or readiness for something deeper. In that process, silence can unintentionally appear, even when emotion still exists underneath it. The connection does not always break immediately. Sometimes it pauses, waiting for clarity, growth, or healing. And through all of this, one truth remains steady. Real emotional experiences never become meaningless. They change form, they teach lessons, and they guide you toward better understanding, stronger awareness, and eventually toward a connection that feels stable, mutual, and emotionally aligned without fear controlling the space between two people.